The rain was freezing the night Cassidy Tompkins was left for dead in a desolate alleyway in downtown Chicago. Bruised, broken, and betrayed by the man she loved, her plus-size frame shivered against the cold pavement as the life drained from her. But salvation didn't come from a hero with a shining badge. It came in a custom Italian suit, wrapped in the terrifying shadow of Delmar Allen, the city's most feared crime syndicate boss. And he didn't just save her. He waged war for her. The torrential downpour felt like icy needles piercing Cassidy Tompkins's skin, though the physical cut was nothing compared to the numbing shock radiating from her chest. She lay crumpled on the wet, unforgiving asphalt of an alley just off Wabash Avenue, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Blood, warm and metallic, trickled down the side of her face, mixing with the muddy puddles pooling around her soaked, torn trench coat. Cassidy was a brilliant forensic accountant. At 32, she had built a life on logic, numbers, and the unwavering belief that hard work paid off. She was also a woman who had spent her entire life navigating a world that constantly judged her for her weight. Her soft, generous curves were a part of her that she had learned to love, even when society and her ex-boyfriend, Alonza Garcia, made it exceedingly difficult. Alonza, a high-ranking investment banker at the prestigious firm of Gallagher and Hayes, had always been charming, polished, and outwardly adoring. But tonight, the mask had slipped, revealing a monster beneath. Hours earlier, Cassidy had been running an independent audit on Alonza's private offshore accounts. She had noticed discrepancies, massive glaring holes in the ledger that pointed to millions of dollars being funneled through shell corporations. When she confronted him in his sleek, glass-walled office, armed with printed spreadsheets and a desperate hope that there was a reasonable explanation, Alonza hadn't panicked. Instead, his handsome face had contorted into a sneer of pure, unfiltered malice. "You always were too smart for your own good, Cass," Alonza had said, his voice dangerously low. He hadn't acted alone. Two large men, their faces obscured by the shadows of the dimly lit office, had stepped out from the adjoining boardroom. The beating hadn't just been physical. It had been deeply, maliciously personal. As the men had dragged her toward the freight elevator, Alonza had hurled insults that cut deeper than the fists that bruised her ribs. He had mocked her weight, his voice dripping with venom, telling her she was lucky he had ever looked twice at a fat, pathetic liability like her. He told her no one would miss her. No one would care. They had driven her to the edge of the industrial district, dragged her into an alley that smelled of decay and wet garbage, and delivered a final sickening blow to her head. Now, lying in the dark, the echoes of Alonza's cruel laughter rang in her ears, louder than the thunder rolling across the Chicago skyline. She tried to move her arm, to reach for a purse that was no longer there, but a sharp, blinding pain shot through her side. Ribs broken, head bleeding, heart shattered. The rain continued to wash over her, heavy and relentless, as the edges of her vision began to darken. She closed her eyes, the fight finally draining out of her. Then the heavy splash of tires cutting through the water broke the rhythmic sound of the storm. A sleek, black European luxury sedan rolled to a halt at the mouth of the alley. The headlights cut through the torrential rain, illuminating the steam rising from the grates and the broken form of the woman on the ground. Two doors opened simultaneously. Heavy, measured footsteps approached. Through her half-open, swollen eyes, Cassidy saw the silhouette of a man. He didn't rush. His movements were calculated, exuding an aura of absolute authority. Behind him, another man held a large black umbrella, shielding him from the deluge. "Boss," a gruff voice spoke from the darkness. "Looks like a dump job. Should we keep moving? The meeting with the Rossi crew is in 20. The man in the center did not respond immediately. He stepped closer, the polished leather of his bespoke shoes stopping mere inches from Cassidy's outstretched, trembling hand. Delmar Allen crouched down, the expensive fabric of his charcoal suit pulling taut over his broad shoulders. He was a man spoken of only in hushed, terrified whispers in the city's underground. A ruthless architect of organized crime, known for a chillingly calm demeanor and a brutal, unforgiving code of loyalty. Delmar's sharp, dark eyes scanned the scene, taking in the bruised face, the soaked clothes clinging to her full figure, and the unmistakable scent of fresh blood. Most men in his position would have walked away. A dead or dying woman in an alley was a liability, a police magnet. But Delmar's gaze lingered on her face. Despite the swelling and the dirt, he recognized her. Not her name, but her association. He had seen her photograph on a desk just 3 days ago. "Cancel the meeting with Rossi." Delmar's voice was smooth, a low baritone that vibrated with quiet power. "But boss, I said cancel it, Vinny," Delmar interrupted, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. He reached out, his large, calloused hand gently touching the side of Cassidy's neck to check her pulse. It was faint, fluttering like a trapped bird. "This is Alonzo Garcia's accountant, the one he's been using to try and hide his tracks." Vinny stepped forward, squinting through the rain. "The one who found our missing money?" "Yeah," Delmar murmured. He looked down at Cassidy, watching as she weakly tried to pull away from his touch, a pathetic, dying attempt at defiance. The sheer will it took for her to move in this state ignited a flicker of dark intrigue in Delmar's chest. And Alonzo just made a very fatal mistake by throwing away the only person who can prove exactly where he hid my $20 million. Without hesitation, Delmar slid his arms beneath Cassidy. One arm supported her back. The other scooped under her thick, heavy thighs. He lifted her effortlessly, ignoring the blood and mud that immediately stained his $3,000 suit. She was not a small woman, but against his massive, muscular frame, she seemed incredibly fragile. Cassidy let out a weak, agonizing moan as she was lifted from the ground, her head rolling against the solid wall of his chest. She smelled rich cedarwood, dark tobacco, and rain. "Get the car warm," Delmar barked over his shoulder as he carried her toward the idling sedan. "And call Dr. Harrison. Tell him to meet us at the penthouse. Now," as the heavy car door slammed shut, sealing them inside the warm, leather-scented interior. Cassidy finally succumbed to the darkness, her last sensation being the strange, terrifying warmth of a notorious killer's arms holding her tight. Consciousness returned to Cassidy in slow, fragmented waves. The first thing she registered was the distinct absence of cold. Instead of the biting wetness of the alley, she was enveloped in something impossibly soft and warm. The air smelled of expensive antiseptic and a faint hint of the same cedarwood and tobacco she remembered from her fever dream. She attempted to open her eyes, but her left eye refused to budge, swollen shut from the blunt force trauma. Her right eye fluttered open, struggling to adjust to the dim, ambient lighting of the room. She was lying in a massive, king-sized bed, adorned with charcoal-grey silk sheets. The room was sprawling, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a dizzying, panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, the storm outside still raging against the reinforced glass. Panic, sudden and violent, seized her chest. She gasped, trying to sit up, but a sharp, blinding agony lanced through her ribs. She let out a choked cry and collapsed back onto the mountain of pillows. "I wouldn't advise move, Miss Tompkins." The voice came from the corner of the room. It wasn't the monster who had beaten her. It was older, clinical. An elderly man in a tweed vest and rolled-up shirt sleeves stepped into her line of sight, holding a clipboard. "You have 3 cracked ribs, a severe concussion, extensive contusions, and a hairline fracture in your left wrist," the man said calmly, adjusting his glasses. "I am Dr. Harrison. You are safe. But you must remain still." "Where?" Cassidy's voice was nothing but a raspy croak. Her throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. "Where am I?" Before Dr. Harrison could answer, the heavy mahogany double doors of the bedroom opened. The air in the room seemed to instantly drop 10 degrees. The man who walked in was the same silhouette from the rain, but in the light, he was breathtakingly terrifying. Delmar Allen was tall, standing well over 6'2", with a build that spoke of lethal, coiled power rather than mere gym aesthetics. He had changed into dark slacks and a crisp, unbuttoned black dress shirt. His hair was dark and swept back, emphasizing sharp patrician features, a strong jawline covered in a dark stubble, and eyes so intensely brown they appeared almost black. Dr. Harrison immediately stepped back, bowing his head slightly in a gesture of deep, ingrained respect. "She's awake, Mr. Allen. Vitals are stabilizing, but she needs rest." "Thank you, Doctor." "Leave us," Delmar commanded softly. The doctor didn't hesitate, slipping out of the room and clicking the heavy doors shut, leaving Caddy entirely alone with the apex predator of the city's underworld. She recognized him instantly. Everyone in Chicago who watched the news or read a paper knew the face of the Allen family, even if the authorities could never make charges stick. Cassidy's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her broken ribs. She instinctively pulled the silk sheet higher over her chest, suddenly acutely aware of her vulnerability. She was lying in a mob boss's bed, bruised, battered, and wearing an oversized, luxurious cotton t-shirt that clearly belonged to him. The fabric draped over her full stomach and large breasts, making her feel exposed despite the coverage. Delmar walked slowly toward the side of the bed. He pulled up a heavy velvet armchair and sat down, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He didn't look at her with pity. He didn't look at her with the disgust Alonza had shown her. He looked at her with a cold, calculating intensity that made her want to shrink into the mattress. "Drink," he said, picking up a glass of water from the nightstand and holding it toward her. It had a glass straw. Cassidy hesitated, her mind racing. Was it poisoned? Was she a prisoner? But her thirst overrode her. She leaned forward, wincing in pain, and took several long, desperate pulls from the straw. "Alonza Garcia is a dead man walking," Delmar stated matter-of-factly, pulling the glass away when she had enough. "He stole $20 million from my organization, and he thought he could bury it in offshore accounts, using your signature as the fall guy. When you discovered the discrepancies, you became a liability." Cassidy stared at him, her good eye wide with horror. "Alonza, he stole from you." "He attempted to," Delmar corrected, his voice dangerously smooth. And he nearly succeeded, largely because he had a brilliant, albeit oblivious, forensic accountant handling the legitimate side of his portfolio. Tears pricked Cassidy's eyes, a mixture of physical pain and the crushing weight of betrayal. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I swear to God I didn't know the money was yours. I just saw the numbers didn't match. I went to him to fix it. He told me I was nothing, that no one would care if I disappeared." A muscle feathered in Delmar's jaw. He leaned back in the chair, his dark eyes tracing the heavy bruising on her cheek and the split in her lip. "Alonza is a fool in many respects. He underestimated my reach, and he fundamentally underestimated you." "Why did you save me?" Cassidy asked, her voice trembling but finding a shred of the defiant spark that made her so good at her job. "You could have let me die in that alley. It would have tied up a loose end for you." Delmar's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the predatory satisfaction of a man who held all the cards. "Because, Miss Tompkins, Alonza hid the money behind layers of encrypted shell companies. My men are exceptionally good at breaking bones, but they are notoriously bad at breaking encryption and navigating international tax law. I need my money back before Alonza realizes you survived and tries to flee the country." He stood up, towering over her. "You are going to find my money. You are going to trace every single dime he stole, and you are going to hand me the accounts." Cassidy swallowed hard. "And if I do? What happens to me then? Do I become another loose end?" Delmar stepped closer to the bed, leaning over her. His proximity was intoxicating and terrifying, radiating heat and danger. "I am not Alonza Garcia," he said quietly, his gaze dropping briefly to the soft, full curve of her hip beneath the sheets, before meeting her eye again. "I do not discard things of value. You have my word. Find my money, and you walk away with your life, heavily compensated for your troubles and absolute protection." "And Alonza?" she asked, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. Delmar's eyes went dead, a chilling void of emotion. "Alonza belongs to me. You just focus on the numbers, Cassidy. Let me handle the blood." For the first time in her life, the promise of violence didn't repulse her. Looking into the eyes of Delmar Allen, Cassidy felt a dark, terrifying sense of justice taking root in her soul. She nodded once, sealing her pact with the devil. The next 4 days blurred into a surreal, pain-filled routine of high-stakes corporate espionage conducted from the confines of a mafia fortress. The penthouse, perched atop a heavily guarded residential tower in the Gold Coast, was a gilded cage. Cassidy was not allowed to leave the master suite, though the sheer size of the room and its adjoining private office made it feel less claustrophobic. Dr. Harrison visited twice a day to manage her pain and check her ribs. The physical agony only was a constant, dull roar in her side, but the mental focus required to untangle Alonza's financial web provided a necessary distraction. Delmar had provided her with a state-of-the-art encrypted laptop, triple monitors, and direct access to Gallagher and Hayes' internal servers, courtesy of one of Delmar's cyber specialists who had quietly bypassed the firm's firewalls. Cassidy sat at the massive oak desk in the corner of the suite, wrapped in a plush, oversized robe. She was deeply engrossed in a complex array of wire transfers, tracing a ghost account through the Cayman Islands, when the door opened. Vinnie Carbone walked in. Vinnie was a man carved from granite, with a broken nose, cauliflower ears, and a perpetual scowl. He carried a silver tray, laden with a steaming bowl of rich minestrone soup, fresh focaccia bread, and a glass of sparkling water. He set it down on the desk with a heavy thud, eyeing her with blatant suspicion. "Eat," Vinny grunted, crossing his massive arms over his chest. "Boss says you gotta keep your strength up. You look pale." Cassidy blinked at the food, then up at the imposing enforcer. "Thank you, Vinny." Vinny didn't move. He leaned over the desk, invading her personal space. "Listen to me, lady. I don't trust you. You were sleeping with that rat, Garcia. For all I know, you're stalling to give him time to run. If the boss wasn't so fascinated by you, I'd have tossed you off the balcony by now to see if you bounce." Cassidy felt a spike of fear, but she forced herself to meet his aggressive stare. Before she could form a reply, a cold, authoritative voice sliced through the tension. "Step back from her, Vinny." Delmar stood in the doorway, his presence immediately dominating the room. He had just returned from the outside, a sleek black overcoat draped over his arm, his dark suit impeccable. The look he directed at his right-hand man was lethal. Vinny immediately straightened up, taking 2 rapid steps back from the desk. "Just bringing her lunch, boss, like you asked." "I asked you to bring her food, not to threaten my guest," Delmar said, walking slowly into the room. "Wait outside." "Yes, boss," Vinny muttered, quickly exiting and closing the heavy door behind him. Delmar walked over to the desk, his eyes scanning the multiple screens filled with cascading lines of data, bank routing numbers, and offshore corporate registries. "Progress?" he asked, his tone shifting from the icy anger he directed at Vinny to a focused calm. "He's good," Cassidy admitted, pulling her robe tighter around her full figure, suddenly hyper-aware of her unkempt hair and bare face. Alonzo used a technique called layering. He broke the 20 million down into thousands of smaller transactions, bouncing them between fake shell companies in Panama, Cyprus, and the Caymans. He was trying to wash it so thoroughly that by the time it landed in his personal untraceable account, it would look like legitimate hedge fund returns. Delmar pulled up a chair beside her, sitting close enough that his knee brushed against her leg under the desk. The casual contact sent an unexpected jolt of electricity up her spine. "But you can track it." "Track? I'm close," she said, her fingers flying across the keyboard to open a new spreadsheet. "I found the bottleneck. He made a mistake on Tuesday. He rushed a transfer of 4 million through a bank in Zurich without waiting for the proper proxy clearance. It left a digital footprint. I'm using that footprint to reverse engineer the rest of the accounts." Delmar watched her, but not the screens. He was watching her face. The intense concentration, the way she bit her lower lip when she was thinking, the sheer brilliance radiating from her. "You know," Delmar murmured, his voice dropping an octave. "Alonzo told me once that his girlfriend was a simple number cruncher, a convenient asset who asked no questions." Cassidy stopped typing. The memory of Alonzo's insults flared in her mind, a hot flash of humiliation. "Alonzo thought I was stupid because I loved him," she said bitterly, looking down at her hands. "He thought because I don't look like the women he usually dates, that I would just be grateful for the attention, that I would turn a blind eye." She felt a heavy, warm hand cover hers on the keyboard. She froze. Delmar's thumb gently brushed over her knuckles. "Alonzo is a dead man who was too blind to see the weapon he held in his hands," Delmar said, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. "You aren't a simple anything," Cassidy. You possess a mind that is currently dismantling a multi-million-dollar laundering scheme faster than the FBI ever could. And you survived a beating that would have killed weaker men. His gaze dropped to her mouth, lingering there for a fraction of a second before he pulled his hand away and stood up. The sudden loss of his touch left her skin feeling cold. "Eat your food," Delmar ordered softly. "Tonight we make our move. I have a team waiting. The second you give me the account numbers and the digital keys, Vinny and the boys are paying Alonzo a visit." Cassidy looked at the screens, then at the mob boss standing before her. She was aiding and abetting a crime syndicate. She was an accessory to what would undoubtedly be a gruesome murder. Yet, as she looked at Delmar Allen, a man who had protected her, respected her mind, and looked at her fuller figure not with disdain, but with a dark, burning appreciation, she felt no guilt. She turned back to the laptop, her fingers hitting the keys with renewed vengeance. "Give me 2 hours, Delmar. I'll give you everything." The glow of the triple monitors bathed Cassidy's face in a pale blue light, highlighting the dark purple bruises blooming across her cheekbone. The penthouse was deathly quiet, save for the frantic, rhythmic clacking of the mechanical keyboard. Behind her, Delmar Allen stood like a sentinel. He hadn't moved an inch in the last 45 minutes, his imposing presence a heavy, grounding weight in the room. He smelled of rich espresso and danger, and every time Cassidy felt a wave of exhaustion threaten to pull her under, the sheer proximity of him snapped her back to high alert. He layered it through a subsidiary of Deutsche Bank in Frankfurt, Cassidy murmured, her eyes darting between columns of encrypted data. Then he washed it through a diamond brokerage in Antwerp. But here is where he got sloppy. He needed liquid cash for the final transfer, so he used a real estate holding company registered in Delaware, a company I audited 3 months ago. "And the money?" Delmar's voice rumbled, low and close to her ear. "I'm bypassing the final biometric lock now, using a back door in the Gallagher and Hayes server," she said, her fingers flying. "Alonzo thought he was a genius, but he used the same secondary authorization protocol for his illicit accounts as he did for the firm's legitimate escrow. He's predictable." She hit the enter key with a decisive strike. The screen blinked, the command prompt executing lines of code that felt like a digital battering ram. A progress bar appeared, inching toward 100%. The silence in the room stretched, thick and suffocating. Ding. A green dialogue box flared to life on the center screen. Account balance, $2,450,000. Status, unlocked. Delmar leaned over her shoulder, his massive hand gripping the back of her leather chair. "Transfer it to the routing number I provided." Cassidy didn't hesitate. She copied the heavily encrypted offshore routing string Delmar had given her earlier and pasted it into the destination field. She initiated the wire. "Wait!" Cassidy gasped, her good eye widening as a secondary red alert flashed on her left monitor. The account had a dead man's switch, a silent alarm. The second the money was moved out of his control, it sent an automated SMS alert to his personal phone. Delmar straightened up, his face an emotionless mask. He pulled a sleek, encrypted smartphone from his inner jacket pocket and pressed a single button. "Vinny. He knows." "Where is he?" Vinny's gruff voice crackled through the speaker. "We've been tailing him since he left his Gold Coast condo, boss. He's at Chicago Midway International. Private tarmac. Trying to charter a Gulf Stream to Buenos Aires. He looks like a cornered rat." "Stop the plane. Secure him," Delmar ordered. "Do not kill him yet." "Copy that." Delmar walked to his desk and picked up a high-definition tablet, connecting it to the secure feed from Vinny's tactical body camera. He walked back to Cassidy and placed the tablet on the desk right in front of her. "Look at it," Delmar commanded softly, stepping behind her and placing both hands firmly on her shoulders, or his thumbs stroked the tension in her neck, a startlingly gentle gesture that contrasted with the brutal violence about to unfold on the screen. "Watch the man who threw you away." On the tablet, the shaky, night vision feed stabilized. The camera showed a rain-slicked private tarmac. A sleek white Gulfstream jet was idling, its turbines whining, while the pilot stood by the stairs looking confused. Alonso Garcia was scrambling up the steps, dragging a heavy leather duffel bag. He looked nothing like the polished, arrogant investment banker Cassidy had loved. His bespoke suit was soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, his face pale with sheer terror. Suddenly, 3 black SUVs breached the hangar perimeter, tires screeching on the wet asphalt. They boxed in the plane instantly. Vinny and 4 massive, heavily armed men piled out. "Alonso Garcia!" Vinny's voice boomed through the tablet speaker, raw and menacing. "Flight's cancelled." Alonso froze on the stairs, dropping the duffel bag. It unzipped slightly, spilling stacks of useless decoy cash and passports onto the wet metal stairs. He raised his hands, his knees physically shaking. 2 of Delmar's men grabbed him, dragging him down the stairs and throwing him roughly onto the unforgiving tarmac. Delmar reached over Cassidy and pressed the microphone icon on the tablet. "Alonso," Delmar spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a terrifying, absolute authority that made Alonso flinch violently on the screen. "Alan, Delmar, please," Alonso sobbed, kneeling in the puddles, looking wildly around for the source of the voice. Vinny held up his phone, showing Alonso he was on a live video call. "Please, I can explain. It was a mistake. I was going to invest it, double it for you, I swear." "You stole from my family. You insulted my intelligence," Delmar said smoothly, his hands tightening slightly on Cassidy's shoulders, sending a rush of heat through her body. "But worst of all, Alonso, you tried to destroy the woman who just took my $20 million back from you in less than 4 hours." Alonso's eyes went wide with realization. "Cassidy? She's alive?" Panic twisted his handsome face into something ugly and desperate. "Delmar, listen to me. She's the one who set it up. She's the forensic accountant. She messed up the books and framed me. She's a fat, lying cow, Delmar. Don't trust her." Cassidy flinched at the familiar insult, a deep-seated reflex born from years of verbal abuse. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the venom in Alonso's voice, but Delmar didn't let her hide. He leaned down, his lips brushing against her ear. "Open your eyes, Cassidy. Watch." She opened them. "Alonso." Delmar's voice was a lethal whisper through the comms. "You are not just a thief. You are a man with exceptionally poor judgment in both money and women. Miss Tompkins is under my absolute protection, and you are out of time." Delmar lifted his finger from the microphone button, cutting the feed to Alonso's desperate, screaming pleas. He looked at the screen, gave a sharp, single nod to Vinny, and tapped the screen to disconnect the video feed entirely. The screen went black. There was no gunshot heard in the penthouse, no blood visible on the monitors, just the sudden, heavy silence of absolute finality. Cassidy sat frozen in the chair, her chest heaving. Alonza was gone. The man who had broken her ribs, shattered her heart, and left her to die in the freezing rain had been erased from existence with a single nod from the man standing behind her. She waited for the guilt to hit her. She waited for the moral outrage of being an accessory to a mafia execution, but it never came. Instead, a profound, overwhelming wave of relief washed over her, followed closely by an adrenaline crash so severe her vision blurred. Delmar's hands left her shoulders. It is done. The debt is settled. Cassidy slowly turned her chair around to face him. He was looking at her with that same intense, dark appraisal. "So," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I found your money. I did what I promised." "You did," Delmar affirmed, stepping back and slipping his hands into his pockets. "The deal was that I walk away with my life, compensation, and protection," Cassidy said, trying to summon the professional detachment she used in boardrooms, though she was acutely aware she was wearing his oversized t-shirt and a bathrobe. "I suppose Dr. Harrison will clear me to leave in a few days. I'll need to figure out where to go. Chicago isn't safe for me anymore. People at the firm will ask questions about Alonza." Delmar's expression darkened, a subtle tightening of his jaw that sent a shiver down Cassidy's spine. He didn't answer her immediately. He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights blinking through the dissipating storm. "Go to sleep, Cassidy," Delmar finally said, his back to her. "You are exhausted. We will discuss your departure tomorrow." When Cassidy woke the next afternoon, the storm had finally broken. Golden sunlight streamed through the massive windows of the penthouse suite, reflecting off the calm waters of Lake Michigan in the distance. The physical pain in her ribs had dulled to a manageable ache, thanks to the medication Dr. Harrison had left on the nightstand. She sat up slowly, the silk sheets pooling around her waist. The reality of the previous night, it came rushing back. She had stolen $20 million back for a mafia boss. She had watched her ex-boyfriend beg for his life before being executed. She was alive, incredibly rich according to the deal, and entirely alone. On the foot of the bed sat a sleek black duffel bag. Curious, she opened it. Inside were stacks of $100 bills, more money than she had ever seen in her life. A new, untraceable smartphone, a forged passport with a new name, but her photograph, and a set of expensive, comfortable clothes, perfectly tailored to her plus-size figure. It was everything she needed to disappear. It was freedom. So why did her chest ache with a sudden, crushing emptiness? Cassidy pushed herself out of bed, changed into the soft cashmere sweater and dark leggings provided in the bag, and walked out of the bedroom. The penthouse living area was a masterpiece of modern design: dark woods, brushed steel, and leather. Delmar was sitting at the massive dining table, an espresso in front of him, reading a leather-bound ledger. He wore a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms lightly dusted with dark hair. He looked up as she entered, his dark eyes tracking her movements as she slowly approached the table. "The clothes fit," he noted, his voice smooth and neutral. "They do. Thank you," Cassidy said, wrapping her arms around herself defensively. "And the bag. The money. You kept your word." "I am a man of my word, Cassidy. You earned every penny in that bag," Delmar replied, closing the ledger and giving her his full attention. "The passport will get you anywhere in the world. I have a car waiting downstairs to take you to a private airfield. You can be in Paris, London, or Tokyo by tomorrow morning." Cassidy swallowed the hard lump forming in her throat. This was it, the clean break. She forced a professional smile. "Thank you, Mr. Allen, for saving my life. For everything." She turned to walk back toward the bedroom to grab the bag, but a sharp, authoritative voice stopped her in her tracks. "I said you could walk away, Cassidy. I didn't say I wanted you to." She froze, her heart skipping a beat. She turned back around, slowly. Delmar had stood up. He walked around the long dining table with the slow, predatory grace of a panther, closing the distance between them until he was standing just inches away. She had to tilt her head back to look into his eyes. "I don't understand," she whispered, her pulse hammering against her ribs. "You are the most brilliant woman I have ever met," Delmar said softly, raising a hand to gently cup her cheek, his thumb brushing over the fading purple bruise. "You stepped into my world, a world of violence and shadows, and you didn't break. You adapted. You fought back." "Delmar, Cassidy's breath hitched at his touch. "I'm not the kind of woman who fits in your world. Look at me. I'm a forensic accountant. I'm not a trophy." She looked down, the old insecurities Alonza had hammered into her resurfacing. "I'm not like the men like you are seen with." Delmar's hand slid to the back of her neck, his grip firm and possessive. He forced her to look back up at him. The fire in his dark eyes made her gasp. "If I wanted a trophy, I would buy one," Delmar growled, his voice vibrating with a raw, intense heat. "Alonza was a blind, arrogant fool who made you believe that your worth was tied to an impossible standard. I don't look at you and see flaws, Cassidy. I see power. I see a woman whose mind is a lethal weapon, and whose body—" His gaze dropped, sweeping over the full, generous curves of her breasts and hips, highlighted by the cashmere sweater, before returning to her lips, "is absolute perfection." I didn't wait for her to process the shock of his words. Delmar leaned down and captured her lips in a kiss that was both demanding and surprisingly tender. It tasted of dark coffee and pure, unadulterated danger. Cassidy gasped into his mouth, her hands instinctively coming up to grip the solid wall of his chest. For years, she had been made to feel small, invisible, and unworthy of desire. But in Delmar's arms, she felt worshipped. She felt dangerous. When he finally pulled away, they were both breathing heavily. He rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he murmured. "Stay with me, Cassidy. Be my queen, not my asset. I will give you the world, and I will burn down anyone who tries to hurt you ever again." Tears pricked Cassidy's eyes. She had spent her life trying to follow the rules, and it had nearly gotten her killed in an alley. Here was a man offering her a throne in the underworld, a man who saw her exactly as she was and desired every inch of her. She opened her mouth to answer, to tell him she would stay, when the heavy oak doors of the penthouse burst open. Vinny stormed into the room, his face pale, an assault rifle gripped tightly in his hands. He didn't even apologize for interrupting. "Boss, we have a massive problem," Vinny barked, moving quickly to the windows to check the perimeter. Delmar instantly shifted, his demeanor transforming from a passionate lover back to a cold, ruthless crime boss. He stepped slightly in front of Cassidy, shielding her with his body. "Report, Vinny. The money transfer you had her do yesterday. It triggered a digital tripwire," Vinny said grimly, turning to face them. "Not the FBI. It was the Rossi family. They had a mole deep inside Gallagher and Hayes. They were letting Alonza steal from us so they could steal it from him once it was washed. Delmar's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. The Rossi family was the only syndicate in Chicago with enough firepower to rival the Allens. They were vicious, untamed, and had been looking for an excuse to start a war. They tracked the final backdoor protocol Miss Tompkins used, Vinny continued, his eyes darting to Cassidy with a newfound grim respect. They know she survived the alley. They know she has the encryption keys in her head to bypass the offshore security. Boss, they just hit our safe house in the south side, looking for her. 3 of our men are dead. The air in the room went ice cold. Cassidy's blood ran chilly as the reality of the situation crashed over her. She hadn't just stolen from Alonza. She had unknowingly stolen a $20 million prize right out from under the noses of the most violent mafia family in the Midwest. Delmar reached behind him, grasping Cassidy's hand and lacing his fingers tightly through hers. His grip was unyielding. "Lock down the building," Delmar ordered, his voice echoing with absolute, terrifying calm. "Call the captains. Tell them to arm every man we have on the payroll. The Rosses want to play a digital game for my money, but they just crossed a physical line into my home." He turned his head slightly, locking eyes with Cassidy. The promise of violence in his gaze was no longer just for her protection. It was a declaration of absolute war. "Looks like your flight to Paris is delayed, Mia Regina," Delmar said softly. Cassidy squeezed his hand back, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm of fear and unprecedented exhilaration. She wasn't just an accountant anymore. She was the prize in a mafia war, and for the first time in her life, she was ready to fight. The heavy steel shutters of the penthouse slammed down with a resounding metallic thud, sealing the floor-to-ceiling windows and plunging the expansive room into the harsh, artificial glow of emergency tactical lighting. The serene of Lake Michigan was replaced by a suffocating, impenetrable fortress of reinforced titanium. Alarms blared in short, muted bursts before being silenced by a command from Vinny's tablet. Cassidy stood frozen for a fraction of a second, the soft cashmere of her sweater clinging to her full curves, before the survival instinct that had kept her breathing in that cold alley roared back to life. She didn't panic. She didn't scream. Instead, she turned on her heel and sprinted back toward the sprawling office. "Cassidy, wait!" Delmar barked, his long strides easily catching up to her. He grabbed her arm, spinning her around to face him. His eyes were wide with a fierce, terrifying protectiveness. "Vinny is taking you to the panic room. It's on an independent ventilation system and lined with Kevlar. You lock the door, and you do not come out until I come for you." "No," Cassidy said, her voice surprisingly steady, though her heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against her bruised ribs. She pulled her arm from his grip, not out of fear, but with newfound defiance. "The Rossis didn't just send foots, Delmar. If they tracked my backdoor entry through the Gallagher and Hayes server, they have a cyber team. A good one. While your men are fighting them in the stairwells, their hackers are going to systematically dismantle your digital infrastructure." Delmar's jaw tightened. He knew she was right. The modern mafia didn't just fight with hollow-point bullets. They fought with algorithms and routing numbers. "Boss!" Vinny yelled from the foyer, chambering a round into his assault rifle. "Perimeter breach on the 40th floor. They bypassed the biometric scanners in the lobby. They're moving fast." Delmar looked from Vinny back to Cassidy. He reached out, his large hands gripping her shoulders. "You are unarmed. You are vulnerable out here." "I'm a forensic accountant who used to consult for Kroll, Inc., Cassidy shot back, name-dropping the world's premier private corporate investigation and risk consulting firm. "I know how elite syndicates hide and steal money. I know their digital blind spots. Give me my laptop, Delmar. Let me fight." A slow, dark smile spread across Delmar's handsome face. It was the smile of a predator recognizing its mate. He leaned in and pressed a hard, bruising kiss to her forehead. "Do it. Burn them to the ground, my queen." Cassidy rushed to the desk, throwing open the encrypted laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with blistering speed. She pulled up the Allen family's main network topography. Sure enough, warning lights were flashing across the server nodes. The Rosses had deployed a brute force malware attack, attempting to seize control of Delmar's offshore holding companies while his men were distracted by the physical assault. Node 1, Cayman Islands, under severe DDoS attack. Node 2, Zurich, experiencing unauthorized ping requests. Node 3, domestic shells. Firewall integrity dropping. "They're trying to drain your liquid assets to cripple your ability to pay your soldiers," Cassidy yelled over her shoulder. Gunfire had erupted far below them, the muffled pop-pop-pop of automatic weapons echoing through the elevator shafts. "Can you stop them?" Delmar asked, standing by the reinforced oak doors, a custom-engraved Glock 19 heavy in his hand. "I'm not just going to stop them," Cassidy muttered, her eyes narrowing as she isolated the incoming IP addresses. "I'm going to follow them home." She initiated a reverse proxy tunnel, a highly illegal digital maneuver she had learned during her most classified audits. The Rossi hackers were aggressive, but they were arrogant. They had routed their attack through a server farm located in a shell company, registered to a warehouse in South Chicago. Meanwhile, the physical battle was escalating. The heavy thud of explosives rattled the floorboards. "They blew the fire doors on 49, Vinny reported, sweat beading on his forehead. "They're one floor below us. We have 10 men holding the stairwell, but the Rossis brought heavy artillery." Delmar didn't flinch. He exuded an aura of absolute control. "Hold the line, Vinny. Funnel them into the choke point at the landing." Cassidy tuned out the violence, her mind slipping into the beautiful, chaotic matrix of numbers and codes. She traced the Rossi family's digital footprint, sliding past their secondary firewalls. Then she saw it. The mole. "Delmar!" Cassidy called out, her eyes widening at the data scrolling across her screen. The mole at Gallagher and Hayes. It wasn't just some low-level associate. It was the firm's senior managing partner. He gave the Rosses full administrative access to your accounts. But here's the twist. She hit a series of keystrokes, bringing up a hidden ledger. The Rosses didn't trust the managing partner. They linked their own primary syndicate accounts to the firm's escrow to automate the laundering process. Cassidy's lips curled into a predatory smirk that mirrored the man she was fighting for. Their entire syndicate's wealth is sitting on an unsecured bridge server right now. "Take it," Delmar ordered, his voice cold and lethal over the sound of approaching gunfire. "Take every last cent." Cassidy didn't hesitate. She executed a sweeping command prompt. A progress bar appeared, glowing a sinister red. It wasn't just a transfer, it was a digital execution. She was draining the Rossi family's multi-billion-dollar empire, redirecting their blood money into an irrevocable, heavily encrypted dark web trust that only she and Delmar possessed the keys to. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the penthouse. The heavy oak doors of the office splintered inward, oak and plaster dust billowing into the room. Cassidy screamed, instinctively throwing her arms over her head and ducking beneath the heavy mahogany desk as debris rained down. Through the thick, acrid smoke, 5 men clad in black tactical gear stepped into the office, their weapons raised. And behind them walked Lorenzo Rossi. Lorenzo Rossi was an older man, his face scarred and weathered, his sharp suits unable to hide the brutal, street-level thug he truly was. He surveyed the ruined office with a look of smug satisfaction. Vinny was pinned down behind a heavy marble pillar in the hallway, exchanging suppressive fire with Lorenzo's men. Delmar stood his ground in the center of the room. He had taken a grazing bullet to his left shoulder, the pristine white fabric of his shirt blooming with dark crimson, but his posture remained terrifyingly upright. His gun was leveled dead center at Lorenzo's chest. "It's over, Alan," Lorenzo rasped, stepping out from behind his armed guards. "Your men are outnumbered downstairs. We breached your fortress. Give me the encryption keys to the 20 million Garcia stole and hand over the accountant. Do that, and I might let you keep your life." Delmar let out a low, dark laugh that chilled the blood in Cassidy's veins. It was the sound of a monster entirely unbound by fear. "You break into my home, you bleed on my floors, and you demand my woman. You must be suffering from dementia, Lorenzo." "She's a liability, Delmar," Lorenzo spat, gesturing towards the desk where Cassidy was hidden. "A fat civilian number cruncher who got in over her head. Hand her over." From beneath the desk, Cassidy felt a surge of pure, unfiltered rage. The insults, the belittlement, the constant dismissal of her worth because of her size and gender. It all culminated in this moment. She wasn't the victim in the rain anymore. She was the architect of their destruction. With her heart hammering in her throat, Cassidy reached up and pressed the final enter key on her keyboard. Beep. The sound was soft, but in the tense silence between the armed men, it echoed like a thunder. Cassidy slowly stood up from behind the desk. She ignored the guns trained on her. She brushed the plaster dust off her cashmere sweater, standing tall, allowing her full, commanding figure to take up space in the room. She looked past the tactical teams and locked eyes directly with Lorenzo Rossi. "I'm not a liability," Cassidy said, her voice ringing out clear and cold. "I'm the woman who just bankrupted you." Lorenzo frowned, his weathered face twisting in confusion. "What are you talking about, you stupid—" "Check your phone, Lorenzo," Cassidy interrupted smoothly, crossing her arms over her chest. "Or better yet, call your financial manager in Geneva. The bridge server you set up through Gallagher and Hayes was woefully unprotected against a reverse proxy breach. I didn't just stop your hackers. I bypassed your biometrics. I drained your offshore accounts, your domestic real estate holdings, and your syndicate payroll funds." Lorenzo's face drained of color. He scrambled to pull a heavy, encrypted satellite phone from his pocket. He dialed frantically, his hands shaking. The silence in the room stretched to an unbearable breaking point as Lorenzo held the phone to his ear. Cassidy watched as his eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated terror. He dropped the phone. It clattered against the hardwood floor. "Gone," Lorenzo whispered, his voice cracking. "It's all gone." Cassidy stepped out from behind the desk, moving to stand directly beside Delmar. The mob boss didn't take his eyes off Lorenzo, but he reached out with his uninjured arm, wrapping it securely around Cassidy's thick waist, pulling her flush against his side. The message was clear. She belonged to him, and she was untouchable. "Your mercenaries are fighting for a dead man's coin, Lorenzo," Delmar stated, his voice a lethal purr. He looked at the 5 tactical gunmen who were suddenly shifting uncomfortably, exchanging nervous glances. "Your boss cannot pay you. His accounts are empty. I, however, am feeling remarkably generous." Delmar's dark eyes swept over the hired guns. "Drop your weapons and walk out of my building right now, and I will wire each of you $500,000 by midnight. Stay, and you die for a pauper." Loyalty in the underworld was entirely transactional. The tactical men looked at Lorenzo, a man who had just been digitally castrated by a forensic accountant, and then they looked at Delmar Allen, a man radiating wealth, power, and absolute control. One by one, the heavy assault rifles clattered to the floor. The mercenaries turned and walked out of the ruined office without a single backward glance, abandoning their boss to the wolves. Lorenzo fell to his knees, utterly defeated, staring at the woman he had dismissed as a fat civilian. Delmar raised his Glock, aiming it down at the broken rival boss. He didn't offer a dramatic speech. He didn't gloat. He simply squeezed the trigger twice. The loud retorts echoed through the penthouse, and Lorenzo Rossi slumped to the floor, motionless. The siege was over. Delmar lowered the weapon and engaged the safety. He turned to Cassidy, his chest heaving slightly. The adrenaline of the firefight still burned in his dark eyes. But as he looked at her, the lethal coldness melted away, replaced by a fierce, burning adoration. "You," Delmar breathed, holstering his weapon and cupping her face with both hands, smearing a bit of soot onto her cheek. "You are magnificent." Cassidy looked up into the eyes of the city's most ruthless mafia boss. She saw blood on his shirt, the bodies on the floor, and the destruction of the luxury penthouse. Yet, she felt safer in his arms than she ever had in the sanitized, deceitful world of corporate banking. "I told you," Cassidy murmured, a soft, confident smile touching her lips. "I don't like being underestimated." Delmar laughed, a rich, deep sound that filled the ruined room. He leaned down and kissed her, a bruising, passionate claim that tasted of smoke, victory, and an unbreakable bond forged in blood and digital fire. He held her generous, soft body against his hard, muscular frame, knowing that together they were an unstoppable force. They had left her to die in the rain. But from the cold asphalt, a queen had risen, and alongside her king, she was ready to rule the city. Do you love thrilling mafia romances, packed with suspense, revenge, and unstoppable queens who defy all the odds? Hit that like button, share this story with your friends who crave dark romance, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more pulse-pounding audio dramas delivered right to your feed. Comment below with your favorite twist from Cassidy's Digital Revenge.